Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel, and today I feel led to talk about my book, After the Trauma, the Battle Begins, Post-Trauma Healing. This book is a lifetime of memories, a lifetime of thoughts. The foreword is written by General the Lord Richard Dannett, who was the Chief of Staff of the British Armed Forces. The picture on the front says it all, how we come unraveled in stress and trauma. Hello, I'm so glad you could join me on this wonderful day. I want to tell you and introduce my book, After the Trauma, the Battle Begins. Before I get into it, just a couple of comments on the back. My dear friend in England, English evangelist Canon J. John, he wrote, "This book was an education as well as an encouragement. Nigel's story is both personal and powerful. This is real and relevant. Best book I've read this year." My dear friend Bishop Dave Benner, who wrote the foreword to this book, who's a Vietnam vet, wrote, "Nigel Mumford knows what he's talking about regarding post-traumatic stress. As a combat Royal Marine in Northern Ireland, he lived it. As a minister of healing, he deals and heals people from it today." From my friend Colonel Josh McCabe, OBE, Order of the British Empire, who was a colonel in the British Royal Marines, he wrote, "My Christian brother and fellow Royal Marine has written a book born from his own deep experiences of trauma and pain and his healing relationship with the loving, compassionate Christ. This book, I'm sure, will be a real encouragement both to those living with trauma and those who wish to be used to help release trauma." My friend Abigail Brenner is an MD, a psychiatrist and an author. Her books are great, by the way. She wrote, "After the Trauma is for anyone who has experienced trauma and its long-term effects, and certainly for anyone who lives with someone who has it. This book, is living testimony from Father Nigel's absolute belief in God's healing power. It is a love letter to God and a gift to you. I believe this should be required reading for all therapists." And from Chaplain Major General retired John Ellington, who's the chief chaplain of the U.S. Air Force, Chaplain Major General John Ellington wrote, "Post-traumatic healing provides insight and healing for one of the most significant struggles in our society." And as I said, the foreword is written by General Richard Dannett, and he wrote from the heart and really speaks about the power of God and his presence in our lives. So this is for the warrior. When you go to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours, you do not be afraid of them, because the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt, will be with you. The trauma is suffered within your family. From Genesis 4:8, "Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.' And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him." So much trauma. For family members and caregivers, from Isaiah 41:10, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." So when I think of trauma and what I've experienced, and the thousands, literally, of combat veterans I've spoken to, you see, we do a program called the Welcome Home Initiative. It's a 3-day program. We put over 1,000 veterans through that program. We've done 38 of those and more to come. It's a free 3-day program for veterans, funded by the public, totally funded by the public. So, and I've watched God heal so many people. And this is a tough book to read. It's not an easy read. It's a tough read. But as you read this, if you find yourself being bogged down, go to the last 3 chapters, because that's where the hope is. It's didactic, it's teaching, it's from the heart, and there's some pretty rough moments during this book. But such is trauma. And I just want to say that if anybody has power over you now, if you haven't forgiven somebody, or you need to let go of something or somebody, even from the grave, even from prison, even if that perpetrator is around today. You see, this is not only for combat vets, this is for other combat vets too, civilian combat veterans, because of the war in the household, the war at work, and indeed the war in the streets, to say the least. So know that your trauma can be healed, and know that this book is written from pure experience. I want to tell you that as a drill instructor, when I cracked at some news that broke my heart, I couldn't speak for a week, and I stuttered badly for 6 months. I don't like the fact that I stutter when I'm stressed, and I'm ashamed of that. But when I asked my wife about it and needed to talk about it, she said that's what she loves about me, that vulnerable side of me, which surprised me because I'm ashamed of it. She's the only one who hears it because that's where I show my stress, probably the most. But, you know, we've all been wounded physically or emotionally. And this book is a book to look at that trauma that you've been through, to help you with that trauma. So I wrote a personal description before I got into this book. It's quite a lot of reading here. It's not a thin book. So I wrote my personal description of post-traumatic stress. The mind is witness to a catastrophic event. The intellect cannot cope with what it has seen. The body reacts physically under duress. The heart receives emotional scar tissue. The soul weeps. This mental trauma is a total body reaction to horror. Whatever that horror is for you, dear soul, I pray that this book would help you navigate the past. Somebody once said that be kinder than necessary. Everyone you meet is fighting some kind of a battle. And José Narkowski wrote, in war there are no unwounded soldiers. And Brother Yun said to me, the heavenly man, don't let your past ruin your present or your future. And I like that. Don't let your past ruin your present or your future. So just to give you an outline of the book, from the chapters, that we go deeply into the many aspects of trauma. We start off with the Loch Ness Monster, an experience where I was at Loch Ness. I didn't see the monster, but I'll let you read what happened there. I talk about the history of post-traumatic stress because it fascinates me. This is nothing new. Ancient Greek soldiers had evidence of post-traumatic stress years before Jesus was even born. Mothers, daughters, wives noticed that men returning from combat were different because of post-traumatic stress. They didn't have a name for it then. I wrote a bit about near-death experiences of body and mind. I wrote about the unseen invasion of the mind, how we allow the enemy to take over. I talk about war at home, domestic abuse, the war of the mind. I speak about depression because that's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. I pray and write about collateral damage and collateral healing. I write about September the 11th, that the world needs healing. I write about the trauma in the battlefield of life, terrorism, clinical issues and byproducts of post-traumatic stress. We talk about the trigger, not only the trigger finger, but how you are triggered by situations. I write about telling your story and how important it is to tell your story and that somebody hears that story. I wrote a difficult chapter on children of the Holocaust. At 16, my parents ran a home for Polish concentration camp victims, and many had their number tattooed on their left forearm. And I can tell you that was life-changing for me to hear their stories of perseverance and strength, what they'd been through, what they'd experienced in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany and Poland and surrounding countries. I write about the root of bitterness, how we need to pull out that root. I write about therapy. I write about living with somebody with post-traumatic stress. How do you live with that person walking on thin ice? I write about healing of memories and inner healing, which is the key to all of this, to pray into and through that trauma. I pray into the trauma of life-threatening diseases. I write about, the trauma of life-threatening diseases. I write about the 911 list, that you can write your own emergency list that you can refer to when you're triggered. I write about a life plan, 7 steps to godly alignment. That is a chapter that many people talk about. Read that because you can reboot your life. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. We address that situation. I write about 7 steps toward victory in the battlefield of life. For surely it is a battlefield, particularly for those of us who've suffered post-traumatic stress. I write a chapter on being welcomed home, and welcome home to all you veterans. And then at the end, I write some prayers to help you navigate post-traumatic stress and the issues of trauma. I pray right now for your healing. I pray that the Lord would set you free from the past, that you may live in the present, not worrying about the future and not being haunted by the past. What I've discovered is that people with trauma are haunted, and I pray that you would be set free by the presence of God, in His love, in His compassion, in His presence, in His faith. Bless you. Thank you for thinking about reading my book, After the Trauma, the Battle Begins, Post-Trauma Healing. Bless you. Be well. Do good works. And for the sake of God, love one another.